Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nature Life in 2021. My name is Cristina Torrente, and I'm going to be your host for the show today. Now, the whole team of Nature Life is super excited to be back. And for those of you who've just come across us, I'll tell you a little bit about what Nature Life Online is. Now, since the pandemic made the Natural History Museum in London close back in March 2020, we decided to take our collection, our scientists, and all our stories of the natural world and put them online, bring them to your homes, in your living rooms every week for you during the pandemic. Now, after a break in December, we are back this January with more stories, more content, more scientists, and more things from the natural world, from the Natural History Museum to you. We are going to do a taster of this January or welcome back show, and then this February we'll be coming back with more stories for you. We'll be coming back with the space season. But today we're kicking the new Nature Life Online season with ancient trees. We're going to have our botanist Fred Rumsey coming and telling us about this amazing species. But remember that we are live. So even though I've got loads of questions for Fred, please send in your own questions and I'll try to get through as many questions as possible. You just have to type them in the chat, either on YouTube or Facebook or Periscope if you're watching from there, and I will pass them on. But without any further ado, let me introduce you to Fred Rumsey. I'm going to say hello to him. Hi, Fred. How are you doing?
Hi, Christina. It's lovely to see you again. Happy New Year.
Yeah, exactly. Happy New Year to you, Fred, and to everyone. And so glad to have you here talking about this amazing topic. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, Fred, before we start talking about these ancient trees, because before we start telling our viewers a little bit more about them, can you tell us a little bit more about your role at the Natural History Museum?
Well, I'm lucky enough to be a curator at the museum, where I've worked for a little over 25 years, actually. And my responsibility is to look after the collections of the British flowering plants, the ferns, and our historic herbarium. So the specimens that were left to the nation by Sir Hans Sloane. So some of those over 350 years old. And I used to work in the UK Centre for Biodiversity here, which is where the public could call in and bring their things for us to identify. And I used to love meeting people and helping them with their plant identification.
There you go. And I think you've been back at the museum a little bit from last year, but not in the new year so far, have you, Fred?
Not so far in the new year. No, we're very fortunate that some of us can still occasionally go in, but we have to be very, very careful and distanced. But we need to go in to make sure that the collections are safe and sound, that there aren't any pest problems, there aren't any leaks or any other difficulties. So there's a sort of a routine for each of the curators to go in and check their particular sections.
I think that's important to let our viewers know that the curators are looking after the collection. So even though you can't go to the museum at the moment, the museum is looked after. And when we reopen, you'll be able to come back and visit if you are in London at that moment. But in the meantime, the curators are on hand looking after the collection. Now, Fred, let's go back to ancient trees. Now, people might be thinking that this is a very wide topic. There are trees that have been around for many thousands of years on Earth. There are trees that were on the earth a long time ago as fossils. But we are going to be talking about three particular ancient trees: the ginkgo, Metasequoia, and the Wollemia. And that is because they are quite special. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about what makes them special, Fred?
Well, I think these three, they're all conifers, which is one of the more ancient of the sort of plant groups. And each of these has a particular story, an exciting story, I think, which is why we've selected them. They're all linked as well by the fact that even though they're very ancient and we have fossil records back in some cases 200 million years, that these plants have become virtually extinct in the wild. And it was their rediscovery in two cases after we'd found fossils it took us, a long time to actually find living examples, and it's like stumbling across a dinosaur still alive.
Exactly. So I think it's important to put it that way in case our audience were wondering. But just close your eyes for a minute and think that you're going into a walk in the forest and then suddenly you see a dinosaur. It could be a big dinosaur, a small dinosaur, but that's exactly what botanists must have felt when they came across these trees in the wild, right, Fred?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, it must such an exciting moment. I mean, it's always such an exciting moment to find anything new, but to find something that you thought had been lost for millions of years is just absolutely amazing.
So let's find a bit more about the stories because they're fascinating. And Fred, I'd like to start with the Ginkgo biloba, which is the first image that we can see in the tree there, and we can see the
Mm.
trees there at the moment. And I like to start with that one because I think it's the one that people might be more familiar with, especially in the UK, as it's a tree that we can see in the streets of many cities, right?
It's been very widely planted, because it's a very durable tree. It actually can survive pollution. So in our urban areas, it does really quite well. It's, as you can see here, it's quite a narrow outline to the tree, and it has really these really attractive and very unique leaves, this sort of maidenhair leaves, and we have both separate male and female trees. So here we see pictures of the fruits, and I think that the name ginkgo actually is a sort of transliteration of the, I'm not sure whether it's the Chinese or the Japanese, which are something like silver plums, which relates to these fruits, which are again very distinctive and also very smelly.
I think people will recognize the fan-like leaf when they see it on the street. They get really
Mm.
yellow in autumn as well, so they're very recognizable. And I think you've told me before, Fred, that the fruit smells really bad. So we normally won't see female trees on the streets, right?
The male ones tend to be planted because they can produce such a lot of fruit. It gets really quite squishy, makes a mess of pavements, and obviously it is quite whiffy as well. Yes.
Now, Fred, how long has the ginkgo been around on Earth, as far as we know?
Well, there are fossils which show not only the distinctive leaves, which are a very characteristic shape, but also those fruits, and they sort of date back at least 180 million years. So that's um, really back into the mid Jurassic. So we really are talking sort of Jurassic Park. This will have been one of the major sort of tree groups that were around at that time. And we see a much greater diversity of leaf shapes with sort of different veins, and these are different arrangements of the fruit. So we know that there were quite a few species present at that time, but we can find things which look identical to the thing which still survives, even over 100 million years ago.
I think we could see that very clearly on that image that we had
Mm.
there. The fossils were very recognizable. And now that you mentioned the Jurassic Park, Fred, I just thought I just had this image of it's going to Jurassic Park, not caring about the dinosaurs, and just going to find ancient trees that they've never seen before. The ginkgo would have been there, but now we have it around streets. So let's talk a little bit more about the story behind the rediscovery of these amazing trees. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Okay, yeah. I mean, so in a sense, we've known about this plant for a very long time. It's been sort of cultivated, revered in Japan. The earliest documented records of it there are in the literature from the Song dynasty back in the 11th century. Um, but to a Western audience, it's first introduced by the writings of Kempfer in the early 1700s, and by medieval times, the plants had gone from cultivation in China through to Japan, and we can find very many very old trees that tend to be associated with religious sites, so Taoist and Buddhist temples particularly. Um, I think that the trees were revered as much for their beauty as for anything else. And these trees can be over 1,000 years old. But it was really sort of comparatively more recently that people really made a determined hunt to try to find any wild examples which might still be hanging on. And there are just two sites, I think, where there's the possibility that the trees may have survived all this time in situ.
That's amazing. So far, we only knew that. Oh, I mean, the Westerners knew that there were trees that had been cultivated, and they were like seeking the wild
Mm,
population.
mm.
That's again, you think about somebody seeking a tree, and it might sound surprising, but of course, you would try and find those. Now, Fred, the ginkgo is the last surviving species in its genus, right? There's nothing other ginkgo except the ginkgo biloba, which is the one that we can see in our streets.
So
We
now,
is all around the world. Is there anything else that also makes it special?
well, you're right. I mean, one of the amazing things about this is that it is so very isolated now. It's the last of its lineage. So it's not really like other conifers. It's in many ways it's much more like the cycads in that it has um, swimming pollen with lots of flagellae, so sort of beating around. And although it's wind pollinated, the pollen once it arrives in the female sort of fruit takes up to 4 months to sort of complete the pollination and start the development of the fruit. And
Mhm.
the cycads themselves are now sort of again living dinosaurs. They're just sort of a few hundred species scattered around some of the warmer parts of the planet. And I think for most of our audience, the most familiar will be the sago palm here, Cycas revoluta, which is very widely grown as a in houses. Not quite tough enough to survive outside in this country though. So
I think I've
it's
heard a lot of people calling those palms, and they are completely different to palms. The more regular thing is the ginkgo, which you look at them next to each other and they look so different, but still.
so very yes, so very different. Yes, you can see why people think of these as palms because they have the very similar sort of leaf shape, and yeah, it's amazing how evolution can sort of so often come up with similar looking things to answer the same sort of structural and growing problems that arise.
And friend, is it right that the ginkgo has some medicinal properties as well, and that's why probably it got maintained by humans and got cultivated by humans?
That's it. I think that there are lots of uses which people have suggested that the ginkgo may have. Um, some of those are a bit dodgy, I think, but certainly it's got lots of antioxidants in there. It's very useful for increasing sort of blood flow and things like that. And it has been suggested that it could be useful against some aspects of dementia and some other things. So the pharmaceutical industry has taken quite an interest in this plant and harvests a very large quantity of leaves to get these byproducts to use in pharmaceutical ways. So yes, I'm sure its use has been not just that, but also people have eaten parts of the fruits. So it's you can see why it could be revered. It's so different, attractive, and it's useful as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Fred. I bet when people see these trees on the streets, next time they see them, they'll look at them differently, definitely. Now, Fred, I think we're getting loads of comments about people saying that they've got ginkgos near to them, they've got them planted on the streets. And there was a comment as well saying that they've got from the States that they've got a fossil ginkgo area really close to the home. So I think some
Wow.
viewers are familiar with it, and I'm a bit jealous of that ginkgo fossil field next to the viewers'
Mm.
home. Now, Fred, we're going to leave the ginkgo and we're going to move to the Metasequoia. And the first time you told me about these trees, the first thing that came to mind was the sequoias themselves, the famous
Mm.
giant sequoias. It's a relative to these trees, isn't it?
That's right. It wouldn't perhaps initially strike you as being so very similar. It's not got the same sort of massiveness that the other two surviving uh, sequoias, the coastal redwoods and the other redwoods, um, and it differs as well in the fact that it has just deciduous leaves. So unlike the others, which are evergreen, this actually drops its leaves in the winter, like the larch and several of our other conifers. So
Mhm.
it differs in that regard. It still can get to be quite a big tree. I mean, easily over sort of 30 meters, and sometimes as much as double that. So it's a big thing. It's just not hugely massive like the other big sequoias.
And different from as opposed to the sequoias, the giant sequoias that
Mm.
found in the States, the mesa sequoias are found in Asia. Is that right?
That's right. Like the ginkgo, this again has managed to survive in China, in Hubei province, and um, we the amazing thing about it was that it was sort of discovered just a little bit after the first fossils were found in the same year in 1941. So not so long ago, and yet the fossils were very widespread, as with the ginkgo and others. The fossils themselves were very widespread, very distinctive foliage, um, and date back to at least 150 million years ago, so into the Mesozoic. Um, and it's it's really amazing that we have this plant again managing to survive in spite of everything all this time, and now just known really in two very small areas, very small groves, where this plant has managed to survive.
And Fred, you said that the fossils and the trees were discovered roughly at the same time. That was in the 40s. It just amazed me that we didn't know that there was a tree, and we didn't know that this tree even existed at all until the 40s. It's quite
I think
recent still, but
it is amazing, really. I mean, obviously, local people knew of the tree. It's just it was unknown to science really until a visiting botanist came along, was doing a again big survey of things to actually find this and then to go back. And of course, that was a difficult time in the 1940s. The tree was revisited in the early 40s, but because the war was on, it was only after the Second World War that really scientists and scientists from elsewhere in the world could get in and actually start to study this. And there was a big expedition funded by the Arnold Arboretum in America, to go and because of the importance of this discovery. And that expedition collected several kilos of seed from this sort of last grove, and very rapidly that seed was transported around the world, and so we have plants even in this country which were growing by 1948, 1950 sort of thing, and those plants are fully mature now.
so what we're talking about 60-year-old plants, 40-year-old plants, something like that.
Hmm. Hmm. And really quite a large size already. It is quite a fast growing tree, has these very nice sort of cones, producing seed. Um, Although I say this is something of a problem for it now in the wild, in that as with so many of these really exciting discoveries, uh, lots of people want to grow them. Lots of people want to go and see them, and that can have quite a negative impact on the environment around them. Certainly, this plant has suffered. It grows in very sort of swampy areas, and those swampy sites are drained, are used for paddy fields, are used for all sorts of other reasons, and this has had quite an impact on the plants. And people have been in again, sort of illegally harvesting the seed in that site because they want to grow the plant. Um, and that means that in that sort of last habitat, there's been no recruitment of new young plants for many decades, which is quite a worry.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, we have it all around the world now because of the collection, so it won't become extinct. But it is a concern. We wouldn't want to lose this last population, which has managed to survive millions of years.
Exactly. Because even though the ones that we have around the world, the ones the grew from the trees from the 40s are now 60, 80 years old. How long can they last for, Fred? Normally, these trees in the house.
Certainly, with these trees, probably in this case several hundred years. Certainly, with the ginkgo and the Wollemia, the next tree we're going to consider, they could live potentially for over 1,000 years. So you've got the most amazing sort of duration. It's always astonishing to think. I mean, even in this country, we can go into churchyards and see yews which are 2,000 years old. The yew was growing, before.
They've witnessed a lot.
Yeah.
Exactly. Now, Fred, before we move into the last tree, the Wollemia, I think we had some cute questions coming through, very interesting questions. So I'm going to shoot some of them at you. Now, Christina Fisher from Facebook, she's asking, do we know why the Metasequoia is deciduous while the other sequoias are evergreen? Do we have an answer for that? Because I know that sometimes science hasn't got the answer yet.
I guess one potential reason for this is the sort of habitat it's growing in. If you retain your needles, your leaves, it's more economically efficient, but they can be damaged, and sometimes it's good to be able to shed leaves to get rid of toxins and things like that. Certainly, in this case, the other metasequoias live potentially in much drier environments, maybe reasonably humid in the atmosphere, but underground, it's not the swamp that the Metasequoia is in, and it's very, very similar to other redwoods which grow, not redwoods, but other conifers which grow in swampy areas which also shed their leaves. So I think there may be something to do with the habitat difference, which gives this advantage to it, to dumping its leaves each year.
That's really cool. That was an excellent question. Thank you, Christine. We had a comment actually, Fred. I'd like to bring it up. William, who is on Facebook, they're telling us that they're currently growing 5 Wollemia. So I think we can move on to talking about the Wollemia, because I think it also holds a space in your heart as well, Fred. So we'll tell them more about growing them. Now we were looking at ancient trees from Asia. We're now moving to Oceania. Is that right, Fred?
That's right. Yes. Yeah. So we're looking at the Wollemia pine here, named after the Wollemia Reserve, which is in the mountains northwest of Sydney, sort of 150 kilometres northwest of Sydney. A very sort of scenic area, which has got this amazing sort of rugged scenery. Very deep canyons dissected in these sort of sandstones, and it was within these very narrow canyons, very difficult of access, that the Wollemia pine was found, and only as recently as 1994. So amazing to think that a tree which is sort of 40, 50 meters tall could hide away and not be found for all that time.
But again, going back to the same of dinosaurs as well, you would imagine a dinosaur moving around, maybe hiding from us, but not a tree. And this is that case. Again, somebody coming across something that they thought it was extinct, and it was actually hiding in a canyon.
That's it. I mean, it's as with these other ones we've looked at, actually this has got an even older fossil record, potentially of sort of 200 million years. And we see the sort of fossils, the diversity of fossils, but they look so very similar. And you then sort of find the fossils becoming much more localized. It was clearly sort of fairly sort of common in parts of Eastern Australia until 40 million years ago. And then the last Wollemia fossils that we really know about were in Tasmania about 2 million years ago. And then nothing until 1994 when they
until
come along
1994.
and yeah, there we are. We've got several hundred trees in this little area of canyons.
And so, as the other trees, is one of the last members of his genus. This is the only Wollemia as well. Can we let's have a look at the relatives to the of the Wollemia, because people might be familiar with the monkey puzzle trees. You can see them in some gardens as well around the UK. You can see a Wollemia here and a monkey puzzle. They look very similar to me, Fred.
That's it. They've got a similar sort of sort of structure and growth to them. They have quite similar cones. You can see on them, and it's this family, the Araucariaceae, which the Wollemia is in, along with the monkey puzzle and a few other things. And that family is primarily in the southern hemisphere, is in Australasia, and the monkey puzzle tree, which we have, is one of the more sort of northerly growing ones. It's in Chile, and it's the only one until we found the Wollemia in this group, which is actually sort of not frost sensitive. And that's why it's the only one we really see in British gardens, even though there are lots of other very attractive, and some of them are grown as houseplants. But so it's the tenderness which stops this group from being grown more widely.
Mhm.
The nearest relatives to the Wollemia are the kauri pines from New Zealand and Australasia, the genus Agathis. The molecular work shows that these are most closely related. In some ways, they look rather less like it, but when you see close-up pictures of the foliage, you'll see the similarity.
There you go. Sometimes I think we've seen a few examples when you wouldn't expect the most related plant to the one that we're talking about, and
Mm,
then
mm,
it's down to the molecular level genetics and or looking at the pollen and the very specific structures in the tree that actually
mm.
give botanists the clue,
The
and I
clue.
find that amazing. Now, Fred, you mentioned that the Wollemia could survive freezing temperatures. Could we say that that's what allowed them to survive from for that long, since that long time ago, the last few ones disappeared,
It,
and that last vestigious few remained in those
I think it's possible. Obviously, um, we've had very many periods of climate change in the past, and cooling and things like this, and this ability to survive a colder snap uh, is probably something which will have been quite a sort of an advantage for this plant, and that may be one of the reasons why it has managed to hang on. Um, it's partly potentially isolation as well. It's just it hasn't been bothered by other things, tucked away in these little sort of hidden canyons. And of course, one of the worries now is that if as we go there, we could potentially transport pathogens and other diseases which the plant may not have experienced, and which might cause it a problem.
And I think this is quite related to my next question, Fred, because
Mm,
you've talked about how secluded they are. They've only been found in a handful of canyons in the Wollemi Park.
mm.
Do we know how big the wild population of Wollemia is at all?
There's probably only about 100 trees, although some of those trees have sort of naturally coppiced, so they're sending up lots of stems. But genetically, they're indistinguishable. So there's very little genetic variation within this very small population, and because of its very localized nature and the very few individuals, it's regarded as critically endangered.
Exactly. So we're talking about, even the way you've said it, it sounds like it's only a handful of individuals.
Mm. Hmm.
that look like there's loads of trees, but it's just the same tree that has
Yes.
in the canyon. So I
And
suppose that's, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I mean that's obviously a worry when you've got so little genetic variation. If if you're susceptible to some sort of pathogen, then if it affects one, it's going to affect you all, and that's a real concern. I mean, even fairly recently, within 10 years of the plant being discovered, there was an outbreak of a phytophthora, one of these fungi which can cause all sorts of difficulties, and there was a concern that might damage the plants. And even more recently, we've had these terrible bushfires because of the droughts, and that really did threaten the plants in 2019, 2020. So they've now got an irrigation system that has been installed to try to prevent fire damage, wiping out this sort of really unique population.
Population. And I suppose that uniqueness make the Australians quite protective of them, quite secretive as well about them. It's not they're not easy to find if you just go in there to have a look at them, right?
No, I think very sensibly we don't want to encourage too many people into these growths. They're not easy of access anyway, or the plant would have been found earlier. Um, but I think again, quite sensibly, there's been a major sort of propagation program which was initiated because of the rarity, and the threat, the localization. They've harvested seed from helicopters because it's otherwise difficult to get to the tops of these plants in these very narrow canyons. And um, within the last sort of 15 or so years, these have become commercially available, and it's sort of quite a lucrative program. Which the funds of which have gone back into the sort of conservation efforts needed to maintain this and other things. So we now, around the world have the chance to grow our own Wollemia pine, which is something a chance that I seized. I must admit, they're not cheap, but they are
You've got your own
remarkably.
one.
I got my own one in the back garden. Yes, here we go. Yes, and you can even though this is only probably less than 10 years old, is pretty. You can already see it's very sort of distinctive bark, like sort of little sort of sugar puffs, sort of on the bark, and you can see the foliage as well. And it is astonishing, really, that a plant from that part of Australia should be quite as tough as it is when most of its relatives are very tender. The most northerly planted ones in Britain are up in Inverewe Garden up in Scotland, and they've survived -7 at least. So yeah, it will be damaged if it's very, very cold. But it has the most amazing sort of gum that it produces around the growing points. It's sort of almost like sort of antifreeze, sort of
Oh, that's amazing.
waxiness, just to protect the growing tips through the very worst of the season.
That's amazing. So, Fred, I'm going to make you a little bit jealous because William, who wrote to us before saying that they were growing their own, they're saying that they're growing 5 Wollemia nobilis in the greenhouse. So that's quite a lot. And the largest one is started to produce in male cones. So
Wow.
waiting for female cones and hoping for viable seeds. So that's really exciting.
Mm.
People sharing the plants that they're growing. The Bumblebee Foundation project, they love sequoia, and they have some seeds. They're growing some seeds that came from the Sequoia Valley in the 1800s. That's really amazing.
I
And
think
we
when you think of sequoias, and you go to the museum and see that amazing slice of through the trunk of one of the big sequoias, it's astonishing to think, see the sort of the history drawn on that. To think that this thing is well over 1,000 years old. It's also rather sad to think that such a majestic thing had to be cut down. It's tragic, really, that something which has lasted so very long.
so long,
Yeah.
absolutely. And Fred and another person shared as well that they have a ginkgo in a mini forest they grow in
Mhm.
garden. And they actually have a question for you. Megan had a question for you. Maybe you don't know this, but I'll throw it to you just in case you can help. What moth larvae would eat the leaf in its native habitat of the ginkgo? They might have a
Ooh, mm,
eating the ginkgo.
that's a really good question, and sadly, I'm a rubbish entomologist and don't know the answer to that. I would imagine that there will be things which do feed on, have fed on it. Of course,
Mhm.
one of the problems you get when you get something which is so very rare, if there are animals which and other things which rely on it, when it becomes so very rare, they can't necessarily find it to keep going. And it's possible that many of the things which did trouble or live on ginkgos 100 million years ago haven't survived because they've been lost as the populations of their host dwindle down to such a small number. So that then means that maybe there weren't things feeding on it which did potentially allow it to survive and be more durable. Who knows?
Thank you so much, Megan, as well. Thank you, Fred, for the question. We had another question regarding Wollemia and growing them in the garden. So Sarah
Mm.
they're telling us that they have a Wollemia. It's about 12 feet high and still in a pot. Any advice on how to care for it properly, Fred?
It does seem to be quite a tough thing. I mean, mine's still in a pot because I might move at some point and want to take it with me. They don't really like sitting in pots for any length of time. They do produce big root systems. They want to be in the ground, ideally. Um, I think if you can site it somewhere where it's fairly sheltered. I mean, yes, it's very tough, but it would be better to have some sort of shade and not to get too cold. Um, a more acid soil will probably suit it, and again, sort of reasonably damp. But the fact it survives in a pot in my garden, I can kill many things. Sadly, not always very green fingered.
Now, Fred, I think you mentioned before the one of the scares with the Wolemias, the wild Wolemias, was a fungus that attacked it. Karen from Facebook, they're asking, are there any fungus that can benefit these plants?
I think most trees, almost all trees, have got a really wide suite of fungi that are associated with the root systems, the sort of mycorrhizae, which effectively make the root system so much larger and forage for sort of particular sort of nutrients and things like that. Um, it's actually really surprising to find a plant which doesn't have fungi around it in it doing all sorts of useful things for it and benefiting from the shelter and things which are coming from the host. So yeah, fungi are a really good thing generally. Although of course there are some which are pathogenic and unpleasant. Again, my poor garden suffering in a minute. I've got a fungus which is attacking my holly tree. Yeah, yeah, so there are good fungi and bad fungi.
As in everything. Now, Fred, we're getting to the end of the show, but I just wanted to highlight how amazing I find these stories because, as we said before, it just proves that there's still so much to discover in the wild, and it's not down to very small animals like insects or small frogs or big animals that are hiding from us. It's also about huge trees that are in very secluded places, and they just waiting for us. So many things are still to discover.
Yeah, and sometimes these things sort of hide in plain sight. We sort of we miss some of the big things. I mean, certainly as scientists, we always sort of say the best way to discover a new species is actually to go to your local museum and look through the herbarium, like I do, because often these things have been collected and just misidentified. People think there's something else, and it's only later with more detailed study that you realise you've got something. So yeah, it's very easy to think that we've found everything big, but we know that's not these prove that's not true.
And as we've seen in this talk, Fred, even things that you found in museums that you already have in museums, they might reappear in the world. So I think it makes it
Mhm.
much more magical as well. Now, Fred, I'm afraid we've reached the end of the show already. But it's been amazing to have you talking about these trees. And thank you so much for sharing your passion and being so passionate about this topic, because I'm sure that you've passed it on to our viewers. Thank you so much
Okay.
for joining us today. I'm going to say goodbye to you, Fred, but actually, I'm going to say to you, see you soon to talk more about plants in the
That'll be
future.
lovely. Thank
Thank you
you
so
so
much,
much.
Fred. Bye. And as I said, we've reached the end of the show. It's been fantastic to have Fred, but also it's been fantastic to have you watching the show and sending us your fantastic questions. So I really, really hope that you've enjoyed the show. Now, remember, from February, we are back every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Nature Live Align is back in your living rooms, in your homes, directly from with the stories from the museum and the natural world. Keep an eye on our social media channels, because we will be posting updates and you'll be able to hear about our upcoming shows. But just to leave you a little bit of give you a little bit of a taster for next month, we are going to have a space season. We'll be talking things from outside of our Earth. So yeah, keep an eye out for it. Also, if any of you is homeschooling, or if any of you watching are studying from home, we are doing this Friday a quiz, a dinosaur quiz, part of the homework club that we're releasing at the museum. Now, in our web, you'll find loads of activities for the week, but this Friday, join us for a dinosaur quiz. We'll be starting at 10:30 a.m. But from today, that's all from me. I'm Cristina Torrente, and I hope to see you soon. Bye, everyone.